What if I told you that the greatest blasphemy ever uttered was not denying God, but believing that you are, in essence, mere human beings? What if the veil of reality is not a prison imposed by a tyrannical demiurge, but a dense layer of self-induced amnesia, woven by the eternal consciousness that chose to experience absolute limitation? Observe the shadow cast before you. You believe you see the world, matter, linear time, immutable destiny. But I affirm to you with the authority of the primordial axiom, everything your eyes perceive, everything your hands touch, every circumstance that defines or imprisons you, is nothing but the literal manifestation, without margin of error or adulteration, of your own imagination operating without self-awareness. The great question that separates the sleeper from the initiate is not whether a creative power exists, but where that power resides. For millennia, we have been taught to seek divinity in unreachable heavens, in texts sealed with blood, or in external rituals that promise to intercede with a distant force. But the fundamental mystery, the philosopher's stone that transforms the lead of earthly existence into the gold of spiritual sovereignty, lies hidden in plain sight, in the silence between two thoughts, in the impulse that shapes a desire, in the visceral faith that precedes sensory evidence. This knowledge, encoded and guarded by the mystery schools of all ages, is not a philosophy to be debated, but an operative law of the universe that demands to be lived. When you understand that your imaginative faculty is not an accessory brain function, a mere passing reverie, but the very identity of the Divine Father projected into time and space, the inner alchemy will begin. They will cease to be beggars of chance and become conscious architects of their cosmos. Prepare yourselves, for the journey we now embark upon seeks not solace or empty promises, but the raw and dazzling revelation of your forgotten lineage. We will dismantle the structures of ordinary perception that have compelled you to live under the tyranny of fate's accomplice. We will reveal how the Holy Scriptures are, from beginning to end, psychological manuals of creation, where the potter, Jacob, Esau, and Judas are symbols of states of consciousness that you adopt daily. We will see how your reality is, without exception, yourselves projected, an unforgiving mirror that shows you only the internal assumptions you have held. But before crossing this threshold, before the initiate can access the great work, they must perform the first rite of intention. This is a cosmic pact, a declaration of will before the invisible forces that govern manifestation. This is a sacred decree, not a mere social interaction. If your spirit resonates with the truth about to be revealed, if you feel the sting of ancestral memory, you must fulfill the ritual. First, seal this knowledge with a like, anchoring the energy so that the truth may penetrate your being. Second, join the Brotherhood of Light by subscribing to this channel, demonstrating your commitment to continuous awakening. And third, etch the ritual phrase into the digital ether by writing in the comments, "I seek the truth." Let this action be your first conscious sowing of the intention that will liberate you from amnesia. Only then do we begin the dissection of the mystery. The first cornerstone of our teaching must demolish humanity's most persistent and limiting belief, the distinction between creator and creature. We have been conditioned to conceptualize God as a transcendent, separate entity, manipulating the universe from an unreachable distance, or judging from a throne of ebony and gold. This conception is not only theologically flawed, but operationally paralyzing, for it deprives the individual of their inherent sovereignty. The profound truth, the revelation that transforms man into a magician, is that human imagination is not merely a psychic faculty. It is the very operation of God, the I Am, confined and expressing itself through the vehicle of individual consciousness. Consider this, the only thing that can transcend time, ignore physical limitation, and structure a reality ex nihilo, out of nothing, is that inner space where you conceive, desire, or fear. This space, my disciples, is the supreme potter, and the rest of material existence, the entire cosmos with its swirling galaxies and immutable laws, is nothing more than the malleable clay in his hands. When a person says, "I imagine," it is the voice of eternal consciousness declaring, "I am creating." To deny the power of imagination is to deny the only divine presence that can be verified, proven, and consciously utilized in the here and now. It is time to lift the veil of mystical metaphysics and recognize imagination as the one true causal agent. The primary error lies in confusing the instrument with the operator, the logical mind, the analytical intellect, the ego that reacts to external stimuli. These are instruments of the dormant consciousness. Imagination, on the other hand, is the being, the spirit that precedes manifestation. The material universe operates under the law of cause and effect, but imagination operates as the primordial cause itself, the origin that sets the chain of effects in motion. To understand this, we must abandon the dualistic view. There is no God above and man below. There is only consciousness, which yea, through an act of love and self-limitation, chose to descend into the dream of form. This act of descent is what we call imagination. When you imagine a state of wealth or perfect health, you are not simply daydreaming. You are introducing a new causal premise into the quantum field of existence. You are sowing the seed of a reality that, by inescapable law, must germinate. Physical reality never initiates change. It is merely the belated and faithful reflection of inner assumptions. What logic and reason dictate as impossible is perfectly possible and already exists in the realm of imagination. The only limitation we face is the faith we place in the tyranny of the five senses over the certainty of inner vision. How has such monumental power remained hidden from the vast majority of humanity? The answer is perpetual distraction. The sensible world, the Esau of Scripture, is so noisy and compelling that we have mistaken the harvest, our current reality, for the sowing, our imagination. We have become accustomed to reacting to accomplished facts instead of realizing that we can rewrite future events through persistent revision and assumption. The mystic understands that the act of imagining requires no physical effort. It requires discipline of attention and a conviction so profound that the imagined state acquires the sensory density of reality. When they achieve this, they are compelling the universe to rearrange its elements, people, events, synchronicities, to conform to the new reality they have imposed from within. Ancient scriptures, at their esoteric core, describe this dynamic. The concept of the Word made flesh does not refer to an audible cry, but to a sustained thought, a mental image sustained by faith, which is the true essence of the creative word. The only tool the Father uses to create is his own imagination. This knowledge imposes a chilling responsibility, but also an infinitely liberating one. If your imagination is God, then there is no one to blame for the circumstances of your life. Nor is there any external power that can deny you what you claim internally. Frustration and enslavement arise when you ignore your sovereignty and allow your imagination to be hijacked by collective fear or negative news. When an individual worries, they are using God's power with terrifying efficiency to construct an undesirable future. The key is not to stop imagining, which is impossible, but to learn to discipline your imagination so that it works in favor of your conscious desires, not against them, driven by the ego's reactions. The inner alchemy we speak of consists precisely in transmuting the lead of automatic worry into the gold of conscious assumption. The magician does not seek to influence the external world. They retreat to the inner crucible, the sanctuary of their imagination, and there mold the form they wish to see reflected. The external manifestation is merely the testimony that the work has been completed on the internal plane. In essence, imagination is not the ability to do things. It is the ability to be things. The law of assumption, which we will explore in depth, states that if you fully assume the feeling and state of being of your fulfilled desire, reality must, by a universal imperative, realign itself to fit that assumption. This is the miracle of existence. The mistake of superficial devotees is to ask an external God. The triumph of the mystic is to assume being that God, that desired state, within the secrecy of their own consciousness. Imagination is the only resurrection body known to humankind, the bridge across the chasm between what you are now and what you desire to be. It is the I Am that has no limits, that knows neither past nor future, but only the eternal now of creation. By recognizing and utilizing this truth, you leave the arena of chance and ascend to the throne of one causality. Once it is established that imagination is the sole creative power, we must confront the uncomfortable truth. If we all possess this operative divine identity, why are most lives plagued by scarcity, disease, and conflict? The answer lies in the crucial distinction between conscious creation and unconscious creation, which is the default state of sleeping humanity. The person living below the threshold of revelation never ceases to use their divine power. They simply use it reactively and automatically, without guidance or intention. Their imagination is an immense, powerful, and eternally active engine. But it is being piloted by the shadows of the past, the fears instilled by society, and habitual responses to external stimuli. This is the architecture of the prison. The person creates their own cell, brick by brick. Through the constant assumption of limitation, unconscious creation is the result of a lack of attentional discipline. When a person allows their focus to fixate on debt, illness, or abandonment, they are, at that moment, imagining that state with perfect fidelity. The subconscious, which is the fertile ground of the mind of God, does not discern between what the ego categorizes as good or bad. It simply receives the seed of the prevailing assumption and commits to manifesting it. Worry, for example, is not a passive state of anxiety. It is an act of intense creation. It is the detailed and often visceral visualization of the worst possible scenario. By mentally replaying their fears, the individual is using the same creative energy they could use to manifest abundance, but directed in the opposite direction. The law of sowing and reaping is relentless. The harvest must equal the seed. If you sow fear, you will reap events that confirm and solidify that fear, creating a cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. The distinction between the conscious and the unconscious creator is not one of power, but of direction. The unconscious operates like a reactive mirror. It observes external reality and projects it back into the future, endlessly repeating the patterns of personal history. The conscious person, however, looks at external reality, Esau, and declares its temporary irrelevance, focusing their attention exclusively on the desired reality, Jacob, that exists only within. The true challenge of conscious creation is sensory persistence. It is not enough to desire. One must feel the reality of the fulfilled desire with such intensity that the evidence of the physical senses pales and becomes unconvincing in comparison. The unconscious person lives in a state of supplication, crying out for the removal of their misery. The conscious person retreats into silence and assumes the state of well-being, living from this new reality, knowing that the external manifestation is a mere formality to be followed. External control structures, from media propaganda to educational systems that glorify limitation, have one primary objective: to hijack the collective imagination. By bombarding consciousness with images of scarcity, conflict, and division, they force individuals to unconsciously create a reality that benefits the forces promoting separation. Conscious creation is, therefore, an act of spiritual rebellion and personal liberation. It requires constant vigilance over the content of one's own consciousness, a radical refusal to allow external events to dictate inner truth. The mystic, upon awakening, understands that the battlefield is not in the marketplace or in politics, but in the private theater of their own imagination. The only way to dismantle the prisons that have been unconsciously created is through the deliberate and focused use of imagination to revisit the past and embrace the desired future. Therefore, conscious creation is not a superficial technique of positive thinking. It is a fundamental reconfiguration of identity. It means abandoning the concept of being a victim of circumstances and embracing the unshakable certainty of being the sole cause of all that is experienced. This is the alchemy of assumption. The unconscious sows by default, the conscious sows by choice. The conscious understands that the potter's clay, life, can never resist the form the potter, imagination, imposes upon it, no matter how desperate the current situation may seem. Liberation from bondage is not found by seeking an external escape route, but through the rigorous application of this inner law. Clearly define the desired state, assume that state is already a present reality, the I am of that state, and persist in that assumption until the physical world, faithful servant, bends and confirms it. The power is in your hands, waiting to be taken from the lethargy of reaction to the pinnacle of conscious action. The fundamental error of the sleeping man lies in his inability to accept the boldest premise of all metaphysics, that imagination is not a tool, but the very substance of deity. When the sacred scriptures declare the ineffable name, the I am that I am, they are not referring to a transcendent being seated on a distant throne, but to consciousness operating at the precise moment of assumption. The entire cosmogony of creation, from Genesis to Revelation, is an intricate cartography of psychological processes, not historical events. Adam is not an individual of clay, but the state of collective consciousness that perceives duality and separation. The Garden of Eden is the state of total fulfillment, imagination free from limitation. The fall is simply the act of projecting blame and creative power off the I am, surrendering sovereignty to the five senses and the tyranny of external evidence. Awakening, therefore, is the return to Eden, achieved when the individual withdraws all projections of power and declares, with absolute inner conviction, without the need for any external validation, my imagination is the only causal reality, the immutable source of all manifested phenomena. This radical understanding dismantles the prison of linear causality, revealing that time and space are merely flexible, malleable configurations, awaiting the imprint of the divine form that you, as conscious creators, must impose upon them. The denial of this truth, the refusal to operate from the certainty of imaginative sovereignty, is the only true blasphemy. The rejection of one's own being as the inexhaustible source of life and manifestation. Assumption, the central technique of this higher alchemy, operates under the immutable law of immanent identity. If you assume the feeling of wealth, you are not simply wishing to be rich, nor asking to be so in the future, but you are being wealth in that present moment, imbued with its essence beyond all visible circumstances. And since imagination is deity, and deity knows neither lack nor insufficiency, this assumption immediately establishes a vibratory field that is fundamentally intolerable, an energetic anomaly to the previously manifested state of poverty or limitation. The visible universe, composed of shadows and effects, operates by an inherent need for balance and harmony between inner cause and outer effect. If the inner cause, sustained assumption, is wealth, the outer manifestation must, by hermetic law and ontological necessity, be wealth. This is not capricious magic or childish superstition, but rigorous spiritual physics and the direct application of universal law. the physical world is forced to execute a massive and synchronized reorganization of people, events, circumstances, and resources to serve the newly assumed identity, automatically building the bridges of incidents, often in ways completely unexpected and sometimes illogical to the limited, rational mind. Crucially, the assumption must be total, saturated with sensation and feeling, not a mere empty mental assertion. It must be such a complete sensory immersion that, upon opening one's eyes, the physical world seems unreal and transient compared to the impregnable solidity of the imagined state. This is the true secret of faith, to feel that the truth is true before the facts validate it, knowing that the imagination has already eternally validated it on the causal plane. The primary resistance you will face on this path of mastery does not stem from financial scarcity, nor from the caustic opposition of others, nor from cosmic misfortune, but from the inertia of the former self, the conditioned and programmed ego. This limited self is the true adversary, Satan in the deepest psychological reading, whose sole function is to sow corrosive doubt about the inherent divinity of imagination, insisting on the deceptive primacy of observed facts and the repetitive patterns of the past. The spiritual battle, therefore, is the unwavering persistence in assumption in the face of overwhelming sensory evidence that cries out to the contrary. Prayer, in this higher context of alchemy, is not a servile supplication to an external or distant deity, but an act of intensive concentration and anticipatory gratitude, where the mind is so absorbed, so imbued with the state of fulfillment, that every thought of lack is expelled like darkness before light. It is the stubborn and loving persistence in the I am of the fulfilled desire until that vibration becomes dominant and exclusive. If imagination is the source of deity, doubt is momentary atheism, a temporary spiritual suicide where the inner source of life is denied and attention is diverted to the external temple of limitations. The mystic must train their focus to sustain the vision with fanatical purity, protecting it from the contamination of external reaction, knowing that every time they yield to fear or worry, they are investing their most sacred creative power in the manifestation of the undesired, perpetuating the cycle of bondage. This rigorous discipline of assumption is the true practice of inner alchemy, the indispensable transmutation of the lead of reactive identity into the gold of manifesting divine consciousness. The crucifixion should not be interpreted as a historical event of vicarious suffering, but as the daily key conscious process of nailing old thought patterns and fear-based reactions to the cross of unwavering mental discipline. They must die to the version of themselves that depends on external validation, that feels limited, that accepts defeat as an inevitable fate. This voluntary death of the old self, of the history-based personality, is uncomfortable and often painful because the old personality vehemently resists its own dissolution and transcendence. But only through this sacrificial denial of the ego, the renunciation of being the victim of past circumstances, can the resurrection occur, the awakening of the new self, the consciousness that knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that its imagination is the driving force and sole source of all manifested existence. When the imagination assumes the desired state with such conviction and saturation that the rational and logical mind surrenders, the virgin birth occurs. The birth of the divine child, the state of perfect fulfillment, without the limiting interference of past patterns and memories. True transformation is not merely a superficial change in behavior, but an ontological shift, a re-engineering of the self, a completely different being in the world, seen through the eyes of imaginative and creative certainty. Once the adept fully understands and embodies the truth that the external world has no inherent reality beyond being the shadow cast by the intensified light of their conscious imagination, all worry, all struggle, and all anxiety cease. The universe becomes the obedient canvas, the faithful mirror that can only accurately reflect what is shown to it from within the temple of consciousness. Circumstances are no longer the stern teachers who dictate destiny, but merely reliable thermometers that measure the temperature of faith, of the conviction held within. The great mysteries and major arcana are not hidden in cryptic and dusty texts, but in plain sight, directly encoded in the divine promises of I Am. But herein lies the final stumbling block for the superficial seeker or the lukewarm initiate. Imagination, being the operative identity of God, demands absolute loyalty and total sovereignty. It admits no divisions. How willing are you to shed all old identifications and shoulder the terrifying responsibility and immense power of being, quite literally, the first cause of everything you experience? Are you truly ready to accept that if something desired has not manifested, the sole source of that delay, and therefore the ultimate key to your liberation, lies in a small, residual portion of your imagination that still refuses to relinquish its entrenched belief in external limitation? The next critical step on this journey must explore the precise anatomy of this final denial, the last veil separating the aspirant from the accomplished master. The central drama of human existence lies not in a lack of power or a scarcity of cosmic resources, but in the constant, voracious, and inescapable use of that supreme power to forge the chains that restrict one's own flight. We affirm that imagination is the operative identity of the deity, the engine that drives all manifestation. Yet, the vast majority walk the path of life like psychic sleepwalkers, ceaselessly projecting their darkest and least desirable inner contents. This is unconscious creation, the reflexive act of affirming, through persistent thought and reactive emotion, the reality of limitation, illness, debt, or conflict. Every worry, every rumination about a possible future disaster, every moment spent mentally recreating a past grievance, is not a mere mental pastime, but a decree of manifestation executed with the force of a sovereign. They are, quite literally, using the divine cement of faith to build the high walls of their own psychological prison. In this alchemical interpretation, fear is not the antithesis of faith, but its dark twin, a perverted and misdirected faith. It is a total conviction, held with intensity, in the certainty of a negative outcome. It is imperative to understand that the creative law operates without moral judgment. It is a mechanical law that does not distinguish between fervent desire and paralyzing fear. For the universal mind, the intensity of attention is the sole criterion of truth, and that to which the most concentrated energy is devoted is what will inevitably flourish in the garden of three-dimensional experience. He who focuses on lack with fear commands it with the same inner authority as he who focuses on abundance with joy. The difference lies solely in the state of consciousness chosen, whether by accident or by design, to carry out the command. The mechanism of this self-imprisonment is both subtle and brutal, operating under the principle of the self-fulfilling prophecy elevated to the status of cosmic law. The individual, operating from reactive consciousness, the mind of the conditioned ego or the you-old self, projects their inner insecurity outward, seeing in the world of circumstances the source of their misfortune and the cause of their suffering. This projection is immediately picked up and magnified by the mirror of reality, which is compelled to reflect structures that confirm and validate the validity of that initial insecurity. Thus, chronic worry about losing one's health generates circumstances and somatizations that make illness seem like an imminent and inescapable fate. Anxiety about loneliness manifests as a series of rejections or social isolations that validate the primary fear of not being worthy of love or connection. This cycle of action and reaction resembles the psychological figure of self-sabotage, but with consequences on a manifest scale. When the scriptures warn us that what a man sows, that he will also reap, The most dangerous and fruitful sowing is not physical action or superficial words, but the mental seed of unconscious conviction that festers within. The drama of Job, often misinterpreted as proof of an arbitrary God, is actually the perfect illustration of the man whose great fear has come upon me. Job, in his piety and morality, had unconsciously placed all his faith in the imminence of disaster and the fragility of his fortune, and the universe, faithful servant of imagination, had no choice but to deliver upon him the object of his deepest conviction. Ancient myths are replete with symbols that denounce this involuntary enslavement to unconscious creation, offering us psychic maps for liberation. Sisyphus, eternally pushing the rock that always rolls back before reaching the summit, is the archetype of the consciousness focused on the repetition of futile effort, on the constant mental recreation of the problem and its inevitable failure. The Ouroboros, the snake that bites its own tail, represents the vicious cycle of inverted causality, where the unwanted effect automatically becomes the new cause, perpetually feeding the original limitation with no apparent possibility of escape. The initiate must view these figures not as remote legends or historical morals, but as dark and accurate mirrors of their own untransformed psyche. The great work, magnum opus of inner alchemy, therefore begins with the stage of solve, dissolution, the painful but necessary task of dissolving identification with fear, worry, and reactivity. This dissolution demands brutal vigilance over the mental economy. The conscious alchemist must discern, second by second, gold from lead in the constant flow of their imagination. Lead represents old programming, the echoes of collective doubts, the expectations of failure learned from past experience. Gold is the affirmation of the sovereignty of I am, the unwavering conviction that the desired state is already an inner reality, awaiting only stability for its manifestation. If the seeker refuses to take the reins of this active discernment, they will remain a slave who uses the divine tools of liberation to forge their shackles of limitation and suffering. The critical and transformative step toward conscious creation demands the violent interruption of mental inertia. Inertia is the silent companion of fear, allowing patterns of worry and scarcity to run automatically, without the intervention of divine will or awakened consciousness. For the architect to take absolute control of the manifesting work, the automatic reaction must cease, and the mechanism of sustained choice must be activated. This is achieved only through the rigorous and non-negotiable practice of focused, sustained attention, where the mind once wandered and lingered with neurotic pleasure in recreating scenarios of loss or illness. It must now be anchored by sovereign decree of the will in the sensation, image, or thought that affirms the already accomplished fulfillment of the desire. It is not enough to desire prosperity or health. One must inhabit the mental state of wealth or abundance, feel the relief, peace, and profound satisfaction of already being prosperous or healthy. If attention wanders, and the old programming tries to assault the mind with images of scarcity or doubt, the initiate must perform an immediate mood review, denying the validity of the unwanted image and replacing it with the accomplished fact of success. This daily discipline, this mental dying to the old self, is the only path to transmuting reactive fear into operative faith. It is the true esoteric battle, the conditioned self struggling to maintain its dominance against the higher self that demands its right to manifest its inherent wholeness. Those who have grasped the precise mechanics of this involuntary enslavement no longer ask the sterile question, "Why is this happening to me?" but instead adopt the only question that leads to power. What unconscious belief am I holding so faithfully that it has commanded this experience? The difference between the two stances is vast. One question demands an external answer, blaming fate, circumstances, or others. The other demands a radical and honest examination of one's inner sovereignty and fidelity to the law. Conscious creation is not permission for the world to give you what you want. It is the inner declaration that the world already is exactly what you know you are at the core of your being. The power you use to generate your worries and fears, that immense power to give substance to what does not yet exist externally, is precisely the same power that must be redirected toward the manifestation of your highest aspirations. The problem was never a lack of power or insufficient energy, but rather the negligent channeling of the creative spark. But if the conscious mind, the one that now knows the law, is the pilot charting the new course, and the subconscious is the vast and powerful ocean of formless energy propelling the vessel, how can the pilot ensure that the depths will accept the new navigational map without resistance or distortion? When they have been following coordinates of limitation for ages, how is the perfect fusion achieved, the intimate and irrefutable communion that guarantees the subconscious, that faithful, blind servant of feelings, will operate from the truth that consciousness has just awakened, without sabotage or lingering echoes of fear? The key, the final nexus of the great work, lies in the secret and masterful architecture of feeling, the golden bridge, the only language that the desiring self shares with the manifesting self. The synthesis is revealed here, my disciples. Feeling is not the superficial emotion forced by will, but the unmistakable vibration of truth already realized. It is the energetic signature of the accomplished fact, the irrefutable inner proof that what you seek already resides within you as a tangible and indestructible reality. Consciousness draws the design, the subconscious provides the material, but it is feeling, the state of gratitude and profound certainty that it already is, that merges both spheres. You must stop waiting to feel and begin feeling to be. This is the final alchemy, transmuting burning desire into tranquil possession. The secret of the universe isn't hidden in complex mathematical formulas or sealed scrolls. It's woven into the radical simplicity of assuming the state of fulfilled desire before the external world can reflect it. When feeling and thought align on an axis of unshakable certainty, the law of attraction dissolves into the law of identification, and you cease attracting results to simply manifest what you are. This is sovereignty, the ultimate truth of the conscious creator. But if feeling is the key, how do they maintain that high frequency, that absolute certainty, when the external illusion of the material world insists on shouting the lie of limitation and lack, and the old coordinates of the subconscious try to rewrite their new map? Leave your answer and your own alchemy in the comments. Wisdom, once received, demands to be shared. Withheld knowledge is stagnant energy. By cosmic decree, you must share this video with those who still walk in the shadow of their own ignorance and need. It is an act of universal service that returns the light to the source. If this clarity has resonated within you, subscribe now and activate the sacred notification bell to ensure that no whisper from the cosmos, no transcendent truth is lost. The work does not end here. You have only acquired the master key that grants you passage. The ascent continues, and the next portal opens before you with an even deeper understanding of the mastery of time and consciousness. Do not hesitate for a moment on your path. Look at the screen right now. Click on the video that awaits you to begin the next level of your awakening and complete the circle of manifestation. Hesitation is the poison of progress, and the cosmic door could close if you do not move forward now. Go. The universe awaits your immediate action.